take home out of that, okay? Huffing and puffing is going to do it. There's a little more sophisticated understanding to it. But this is kind of where the body psychotherapy comes in, okay? I like to think of the fighting circumstance, okay, as problem solving, okay? I love problem solving. So when I'm in the fighting circumstance, this is a big example for me of a problem to solve. He's big, he's fast, his eyes don't look in the same direction, there's a little drool coming down. What's my problem? There's a lot of different information that's throwing. I used to bounce in the bars, so that's what so I'm getting a lot of information here, and I have to find out from all these pieces of information what's the real deal. What do I need to discover? What is? I need to know truth right then and there, because I need to operate on truth. And if I'm missing important pieces or filtering it a certain way, I'm going to have a much more difficult outcome, right? So when I came to St. John's, I wrote my paper for entrance on Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Is anybody familiar with that? Robert Persing. And it's got some very interesting and useful things. And one of the useful things is what he talks about problem solving. He talks about troubleshooting a motor. And I have done this exact thing. I do a lot of plumbing and mechanical stuff, and a lot of times I have to troubleshoot. And he said, if we understand what stops us when we get stuck, when we're troubleshooting, we really look at that, what we'll discover is very interesting. What we'll discover is that there was a little fact, perhaps, that presented itself to us along the way, that we had a little conversation in our head, and we said, no, that's not important. And then we had maybe another fact that we said, oh, this is very significant, but it wasn't. And it led us barking off down a whole wrong alley, right? So we have this, we're bombarded with all of these facts. The motor's red, probably not that significant. There's oil dripping out of it, maybe that's significant. It runs on gasoline, that might be significant, right? And then I start to assemble information until finally, what I'm doing this whole time, whether I realize it or not, is I'm evaluating and prioritizing this information. More important, less important, probably important, who knows, and I'm sort of going through this association thing. And what I like to think is that, and the motor thing shows it in a very clear-cut way, because when you do it, when you get it, the motor starts. And if you don't get it, the motor does not start. And there's something very empirical about that. Martial arts is also that empirical. You come out, your nose is either still there where it started or it isn't, or worse, right? It's very, very, either this worked or it didn't work, same sort of thing. So I like to think of it as problem solving. Only in the problem of a martial encounter, there's a bunch of solutions. And there's some that are really good, and there's some that are really bad, and there's a bunch in the middle. And there's the one that I always like to think of that I call the Buddha path. You know, a lot of people, they don't realize that the Buddha was actually a very high-level, highly skilled martial artist. A lot of people's image of the Buddha is that he was only pacifistic, right? But there's a very fun story about the Buddha who, when he was traveling through a certain area, he had to go through a forest. And there was a person hanging out in that forest whose name was Angulimala. You know, mala means, anguli means finger. And this guy would collect fingers of people in a mala bead. And his challenge was to get 1,000 fingers. And there's a whole backstory to this. But the Buddha, for karmatic reasons, some say it was his mystic vision. One story says that his mother, this guy's mother, was going to be the next one through the forest, and that the Buddha prevented him from the heinous negative karma of matricide by having his encounter with him first. And boy, if I could be a fly on the wall for any occurrence in history, this is one I would have loved to see. Because the story says that they're going into the forest, and they ask him, the disciples, and say, well, you know, this is the forest where Angulimala hangs out. What are you doing? He says, yeah, well, we're going to go this way. We're not going this way. And they went around. And he went alone. And so, of course, he finds Angulimala, and Angulimala, as is fitting, attacks him. And the sutra here is very interesting, because the sutra says that while the Buddha never really moved fast, he was always too far away for Angulimala to reach. Now, there is a certain type of martial skill that will absolutely convey that capacity. And the story goes that after completely frustrating Angulimala, finally Angulimala shouts at the Buddha, "Stop!" And that's when the Buddha says, "No, you stop." And that's when he unfolds the situation. So then they get to the other side of the forest, and they're all having dinner. He's met up with the other disciples, and as they're all having dinner, well, so what happened with that going through the forest? He said, "Oh yeah, I want you guys to meet my new disciple, Angulimala." And they all got up and ran away. Right? But the point here also is that the higher level consciousness should transcend violence, not run away from it, right? Not make a judgment about it, but transcend it and understand it from its roots, right? And there's only a way that you really can do this. This is not a thing just in the brain. This has to be integrated through the whole human, and that's what the real point of this is, okay? So we have this idea of a Buddha path, and I'm faced with a martial encounter, and I need to find my way to that Buddha path, or as close to it as I can. There are better and there are worse. There are many different ways maybe. Different masters have different strengths, and they'll open up different paths in an apparently impossible situation because they have certain abilities. So there I am, and I'm looking at this Buddha path. I'm looking for it. And then there comes the question, well, why am I going to miss this? What's going to sit in the way? How am I not going to see this? And that's where we have to start looking at, there's a famous thing in Buddhism where they say, a knife cannot cut itself, and a lamp cannot cast light on itself. And this has to do with the mind and the special ability of the mind to actually be self-reflective. So I want to understand critically, because now literally my life and death might hinge on whether I'm perceiving truth accurately or not. And this makes an extremely high priority whether my perceptions are accurate or not accurate. And that's where this becomes a spiritual discipline, okay? Because there are a series of different things that can interrupt that process of me seeing truth, me discovering truth. Not only do I need to discover this truth, I need to be able to act out of and in this truth. And there's a chain that has to happen, and it can be obstructed in different ways. So there are different models that martial arts uses for